Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 9 hidden gems for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, players that you may consider to be sleeper options, but I like to call them my hidden gems based on everyone's favorite cinematic universe. These are players that, as of this current moment in time, either first and foremost aren't rostered in very many leagues or aren't even being started going into Week 9. And with two teams on by, the San Francisco 49ers and Pittsburgh Steelers, both being snapped out of existence, and on top of it, all of our studs dealing with injuries, we're going to need to go ahead, potentially hit the waiver wire or find players that are sitting on our bench that may give us a greater chance to capturing a victory in Week 9 and get ourselves one step closer to capturing a championship in 2024. Outside of that, again, I'm going to talk about each of these players on an individual basis. If you're looking for my thoughts on one of these specific players, travel down to the description. While you're down there, you can find timestamps. Also, at the end of today's video, I will be putting together a couple entries in regards to Underdog going into this weekend's slate of games. So if you guys are interested regarding that, you can always fast forward to that section if that is what is your primary interest. Outside of that, while you're down in the description, be sure to subscribe and of course click the bell notification button. Every single day on the channel, I live stream. Later tonight, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I will be live here on the channel. So if you have any questions, be sure to swing on by. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., I will also be live streaming. And then also Sunday morning live stream starting at 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., 3 hours of nonstop questions answered. So for those of you interested, be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much for all the support. And again, if you guys haven't checked out Underdog, use code Andrew today. Not only will you be able to go ahead and potentially tail some of the picks, get the first time deposit offer claimed, but also get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. These rankings are by position, by tier, half PPR, full PPR, all encompassing rankings, including flex. So for those of you who are wondering and potentially trying to take advantage of the overall opportunity, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. If you are not eligible based on your current location, you can always find the rankings via Patreon. Link also down in the description. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's begin by talking about Mike Gesicki, the first hidden gem of Week 9. Mike Gesicki is this week's Soul Stone, and like we all know, the Soul Stone requires a sacrifice, and this sacrifice is someone that we love, who unfortunately in this case is T. Higgins. For a second consecutive week due to the quad injury, he is expected to miss. As of this current moment in time, T. Higgins has been given the doubtful designation, and like I talk about all the time, whenever a player is given that doubtful designation, do not anticipate them to play. It's about a 99% chance that they are going to be designated from doubtful to out within the upcoming days. Therefore, if T. Higgins is going to miss this week against the Las Vegas Raiders, expect for Mike Gesicki to get himself more of an expanded role, similar to what he had last week. In the last two games in which he has played without T. Higgins in the starting lineup, we have seen Mike Gesicki accumulate 9 targets, 7 receptions, 91 receiving yards, and 12.6 fantasy points in a half PPR back in Week 2. And then most recently, of course, in Week 8, 8 targets, 7 receptions, 73 receiving yards, 8.8 fantasy points, only because he did have a fumble that he lost. But overall, the opportunity share continued to go in the direction of Mike Gesicki in the absence of T. Higgins. When we talk about the overall snap share that Mike Gesicki is exposed to in the absence of T. Higgins, in the last two games that I'm referencing to, 47% and 53% of the overall snaps played, in comparison to the rest of the season with T. Higgins active, playing 38% of the overall snaps within the offense. Again, a lot less opportunity, and on top of it, last week ran 24 total routes, which led to him being targeted on 33% of those overall 24 routes. Again, a pretty good target rate. But on top of that, when we look at Week 6 and 7, when T. Higgins was active, healthy, and of course dominating within this offense, we only saw, Mike Gesicki run 27 total routes in that game in comparison to 24 this most recent performance. A lot of opportunity going in the direction of Mike Gesicki in a matchup in which he should be able to find a lot of success. Most recently, the Kansas City Chiefs tight ends combined for 16 targets, 13 receptions, 113 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The vast majority of that damage done by Travis Kelce, 12 targets, 10 catches, over 90 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Of course, when Travis Kelce is your opposing tight end, expect him to play well. But in this situation, I'm anticipating that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to utilize Mike Gesicki as the Travis Kelce of their offense this week, continue to target him at a high rate. His primary coverage will be Divine Diablo. Thus far this season, he's allowing 0.34 fantasy points per route run against him. And again, when we talk about Mike Gesicki, a player that isn't very much so rostered, much less started, he's only rostered in 12% of sleeper leagues and 8% of Yahoo leagues. Expect him to be someone that you could pick up and play immediately if, in fact, you have lost, unfortunately, George Kittle due to the bye week and or a tight end like Dallas Goedert due to his most recent injury. The next player we want to talk about is Josh Downs, the Reality Stone. Josh Downs, wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts, is someone that I've talked about ad nauseum over the course of this entire week because I truly do believe he's going to have himself an abundance of overall upside due to the reality of the situation. Anthony Richardson was not playing up to his overall expectation. Therefore, Joe Flacco is now going to be the starting quarterback of this offense going forward. In the last 3 games in which we have seen Josh Downs with Joe Flacco as the primary quarterback of this offense, we have seen Josh Downs average 10 targets per game, 8 receptions per game, 72 receiving yards per game, and has scored a receiving touchdown in 2 of those 3 games. 15.2 fantasy points in a half PPR, only more upside in a full PPR scoring format. Over the course of those 3 games, Josh Downs has ran 90 total routes, targeted on 30 of those routes, which is a 33% target rate, an incredible number. But not only that, has been able to manage a 28% target share amongst all Colts receiving options. Going into this week, again, we're anticipating that Josh Downs is going to be an immediate upside play and someone that, again, I've already ranked within my top 15 and a half PPR, only continues to grow as a higher rank in a full PPR scoring format. Even if we travel back to last season, with Gardner Minshew as the starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts in Josh Downs' rookie season, when he was given opportunities of 6 or more targets in a singular game, in the games in which he participated with Minshew as a starting quarterback, 11.2 fantasy points per game and a half PPR. Joe Flacco thus far this season has elevated those numbers, mainly because Joe Flacco thus far this season, a 66% passing completion percentage in the 3 games he has played within this offense, a huge improvement in comparison to the 60% that he was with the Cleveland Browns late last season. On top of it, Joe Flacco, again, 8 consecutive games throughout the regular season with the Browns, with the Colts, in which he has had 2 or more passing touchdowns in every single one of those games. He continues to play well, and they have an opportunity against the best matchup at the wide receiver position. The Minnesota Vikings thus far this season allowing 39.2 fantasy points per game. And when we talk about their coverage of slot receiving options, they have struggled all season long. Over the course of the last 4 games, we have seen Green Bay slot receivers combined for 15 catches, 184, 2 touchdowns. New York Jets slot receiving options, 11 catches, 116 and a touchdown. Detroit, 6 catches, 85 and 2 touchdowns. And most recently, the LA Rams, 3 catches for 38 and a touchdown. There is so much potential for upside this week with Josh Downs being the primary slot receiving option of the Indianapolis Colts. Byron Murphy, the primary nickel cornerback of the Minnesota Vikings, has allowed the 12th most targets and receptions and 10th most receiving yards to opposing slot options thus far this season. They've struggled mightily. This is a wide receiver that is currently only being started in 44% of Yahoo leagues and 53% of sleeper leagues. That number needs to be 100%. He is going to have himself a massive performance this week against the Minnesota Vikings in a negative game script. Earlier today, he was removed from the injury report. There is no doubt that he is playing and is going to ball out. All right, moving on to the Power Stone. We have RICO DOWDLE, running back of the Dallas Cowboys. Usually, the Power Stone is a power back, and in this case, we're not hoping for power back upside. We want RICO DOWDLE to obviously be relevant on the ground, but also get himself a lot of receiving utilization within this upcoming game. Now, the last time we saw RICO DOWDLE was back when they got the Lions matchup and they got absolutely decimated in that game and they pulled the starters in the 4th quarter. Therefore, we didn't see much of an overall opportunity share from RICO DOWDLE. But after that game, going into the bye week, we did hear Mike McCarthy, the head coach, and one of the primary play callers of this offense say that they want to get more touches out of DOWDLE going forward. Obviously, last week, DOWDLE with an illness missed that game. But going forward, we're going to potentially, hopefully see a greater workload share for RICO DOWDLE, especially considering where we left off in weeks 4, 5, and 6. In week 4 against the New York Giants, RICO DOWDLE, 11 carries for 46 yards, pretty good overall yard per carry average, 1 reception for 15 yards and a receiving touchdown. 12.6 fantasy points and a half PPR. Moving on to week 5, even more opportunity. 20 carries for 87 rushing yards, 2 receptions for 27 and a receiving touchdown. 18.4 fantasy points, of course, continuing to grow his overall workload and his fantasy point upside. And then, of course, unfortunately, in week 6, against the Detroit Lions, 5 carries for 25, a 5 yard per carry average, 5 receptions for 30 receiving yards on 6 total targets, 8 fantasy points. He has been fantasy relevant each of the last 3 games that he has played. If he had completed the entire Lions game and played with the starters all the way through, if they had not pulled them out, he would have easily scored double-digit fantasy points, if not more. So going into this week, a running back that over the course of the last 3 games has accumulated 9 targets, 8 receptions, 72 receiving yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, has ran 38 routes in those 3 games, targeted 9 of those overall routes, which again is a 24% target rate, pretty good overall number. The opportunities are going to be there taking on the Atlanta Falcons, who as a defense against opposing running backs have allowed Tampa Bay, again, they've played Tampa Bay twice in the last month. The first time they took on Tampa Bay, 19 carries for 116 on the ground. Against Carolina, 21 for 93. Against Seattle, 23 for 93 and 1 touchdown. And then most recently, Tampa Bay, 17 carries for 76. And of course, they allowed a lot of receiving utilization out of both Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, which hopefully RICO DOWDLE will be exposed to going into the upcoming week. But as a whole, in terms of fantasy points allowed on the ground, in terms of rushing statistics isolated, over the course of the last 4 games, they're allowing 10.95 fantasy points per game and 4.73 yards per carry to opposing running backs. Again, it's a solid matchup. we're anticipating RICO DOWDLE to get back on track and have himself a great performance. And considering Vegas has currently put the total for this game between the Falcons and Dallas Cowboys at a 51.5 number, that number may move up, may move down. We'll have to wait and see, but it is implicated as the highest scoring game going into the week. If this is going to be a shootout, expect for RICO DOWDLE to get himself a lot of opportunity. He's currently only being started in 16% of Yahoo leagues, 18% of sleeper leagues. He's a fantastic play as this week's Power Stone. All right, moving on to the Space Stone. We have DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. Has only been a Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver for about 1 week now. And last week in his overall performance, didn't get much opportunity. Only played 32% of the overall snaps, which was anticipated because, again, a new wide receiver trying to learn a brand new offense within 1 week is impossible. But going into week 9, he is this week's Space Stone because this is a wide receiver. Like always, a Space Stone is a wide receiver that is shooting for the moon and is going to fall amongst the stars in an incredible matchup. Last week, we had JSN, who had himself a fantastic performance. And going into this week, we have DeAndre Hopkins taking on an incredible matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But besides the matchup in itself, when we talk about the opportunity share that he is going to potentially see this upcoming week, it is going to grow significantly. At least that's what we have heard from Andy Reid, the head coach and primary play caller of this offense. When we saw, of course, last week, 32% of the overall snaps, 14 routes ran, 3 total targets, a 21% target rate. That number is only going to increase as his overall rapport with Patrick Mahomes continues to build. Now, when we compare this situation to Kareem Hunt, and the reason why I want to compare it is because it was a player that wasn't within this overall offense throughout training camp and was recently shoved into the overall starting role of this offense most recently. So if we compare him to Kareem Hunt, when we look at Kareem Hunt's first week as a starter within this offense, obviously the first week he had joined the team, he didn't even play because he still needed to learn the entire playbook and get into full shape. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins a step ahead of him in that overall regard. But in the first week in which Kareem Hunt played, 45% of the snaps, 16 total touches. The week after, 63% of the overall snaps and 28 total touches. They ramped up his overall workload, and they slowly did so, but they got him to a position to where he was a starter clear and away, and a fantasy dominant performance from him again within that next week. So as we progress, we're going to anticipate that DeAndre Hopkins very similarly is going to be ramped up and given a full workload of opportunity and full integration within this offense as the primary number 1 X receiver on the outside. Yes, they do have Xavier Worthy, but Juju Smith-Schuster is expected to be injured and miss again. You can't trust on guys like, Justin Watson. Sky Moore is also injured. Outside of Travis Kelce and maybe the occasional Xavier Worthy reception, it is going to be a lot on DeAndre Hopkins to have himself a great performance in an advantageous matchup, taking on the Buccaneers, who are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, 30.11. If we talk about recent wide receiver success against the secondary, Mooney, 4 catches, 86 and a touchdown. Bateman, 4 catches, 121 and a touchdown. Bub Means, 4 catches, 45 and a touchdown. Drake London, 12 receptions, 154 and a touchdown. Mooney, 9 catches, 105 and 2 touchdowns. That's just the last 4 games of production from wide receivers against the secondary. With this secondary missing, Jamel Dean, of course, going to the injured reserve. Their primary number 1 and number 2 cornerbacks are Zion McCollum and Tyreek Funderburk. The talent that they have to cover him is not enough. And even though this is not the 2017-2018 DeAndre Hopkins in form, this is enough of a DeAndre Hopkins to be able to have himself an incredible performance. A wide receiver currently only being started in 30% of Yahoo leagues, 39% of sleeper leagues, should get a lot more respect going into this week's matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Let's move on to the time stone, because it's finally time for another wide receiver to step up within this Carolina Panthers offense. Because the way that this Carolina Panthers organization is trending is they are looking towards the future. Not just the future of Jalen Coker, a young wide receiver, but also the future of potentially acquiring the number 1 overall pick of the 2025 NFL draft. And in order to ensure that they get the overall number 1 pick, they got to make sure that they're losing games. And how do you do that? First and foremost, you bench Andy Dalton despite the fact that he is fully healthy this week. You continue to trot out Bryce Young for the future. You trade away Deontay Johnson. There are rumors as of this week that have been circulating in regards to them also trading or potentially trading Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, still coming off of the IR, is expected not to play this week as well because maybe they want to trade him and they don't want to risk him potentially re-aggravating his injury. If in fact this is all trending in that direction, outside of Xavier Legette, there is really no target competition within this offense with Bryce Young, a quarterback, outside of Jalen Coker, who, again, going into this week is expected to have himself more and more opportunity. He didn't play up until week 4. Week 4 was his first overall experience within the National Football League, but from weeks 5 through 8 has been given more and more exposure to opportunity every single time out. Most recently in week 8, when, of course, this Carolina Panthers offense traveled to Denver and had to take on that blender of a defense that, of course, has incredible cornerbacks and secondary play. Even with that, Jalen Coker, 6 total targets, 4 receptions, 78 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown for over 15 fantasy points and a half PPR. So why not continue to build upon that overall performance with another great game? Xavier Legette, even though he is currently questionable with his current injury, with a toe injury, and has been limited all week, the expectation is he's going to play. And he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver of this offense. But on the opposite side of the field, pulling number 2 cornerback coverage should be Jalen Coker. And that is only going to give him more opportunity, because when we look at the secondary of the New Orleans Saints, they are battered and they are completely decimated. Marshawn Lattimore, out. Kool-Aid McKinstry, out. Paulson Adebo on the injured reserve. Rico Payton, the backup to Kool-Aid McKinstry, out. He did not practice all week long. If your primary cornerbacks are all gone, expect a lot of potential upside from Legette and Coker this week, even with Bryce Young at quarterback. This is the best opportunity that this offense has to get revenge for what happened in week 1. I'm expecting them to do so. Jalen Coker, a fantastic play as this week's time stone. To close out the hidden gems, we have Tyler Lockett as this week's mind stone. Cursed with knowledge. The fact of the matter is, I don't anticipate that DK Metcalf is getting his play. Again, I don't have any current information regarding his overall status, but eventually this afternoon, as soon as probably this video comes out, they'll probably say that he's out, because he did not practice Wednesday, Thursday, and probably not going to practice going into Friday because their bye week is upcoming. So might as well not throw out DK Metcalf to the Wolves and potentially re-aggravate an injury when you need him healthy after the bye week. So if in fact that takes place, Tyler Lockett is a fantastic play. Even though last week we did mention JSN as a hidden gem and he played well, Tyler Lockett, even though he didn't play well against the Buffalo Bills, it was primarily because of the matchup. And that's why I didn't suggest him in very many of my overall rankings. Therefore, going into this week, it is Tyler Lockett's week to have himself an upside performance, taking on the Los Angeles Rams, a defense he is very much so familiar with and has taken on his entire career, a defense that is allowing 24.9 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. And again, as of right now, there are quite literally only 2 eligible wide receivers for the Seattle Seahawks that will be relevant for fantasy purposes, Lockett and JSN. So if they're going to split those numbers down the middle and each of them are going to score 12.5 fantasy points, beautiful. We'd love to see that, especially considering over the course of the last 4 games in which Tyler Lockett has been given 7 or more targets this season, he's averaging over 10 fantasy points per game in a half PPR, even more in a full PPR. Again, even though last week's matchup was a disaster, taking on the Buffalo Bills is not an easy overall proposition for any outside wide receiver. Therefore, going against the LA Rams, we should expect a lot more potential production. Not only that, but expect a lot more rushing upside from this offense, which will open up the play action game and make their offense that much more relevant and give wide receivers like Tyler Lockett and JSN even more touchdown upside within the given week, which only continues to elevate their baseline of production. My expectation this week is another solid performance out of Tyler Lockett as this week's mind stone. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to my hidden gems for week 9 of the 2024 fantasy football season. We're now going to go ahead and transition into talking about some underdog entries that I've gone ahead and made going into this week. So the first entry that I want to suggest is the following. Now, obviously on Thursday Night Football, we suggested Tank Dell and of course Devontae Adams to surpass our overall reception numbers. They went ahead and did so. Within that overall slip, I also included Ferguson and Achane, but I want to continue with the overall prospect of Achane. And even though earlier this week, I was able to take his higher on receptions at 2.5, currently the minimum that you can take it at is 3.5. So I've gone ahead and put Devon Achane, who again, in each of the last 3 games with Tua Tagovailoa under center, he has had himself 6 or more receptions and 7 or more targets in each of those games. Again, the last time out that he took on the Buffalo Bills, 7 targets, 7 receptions, over 70 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. 3.5 receptions is a cakewalk. Then we move on to Brock Bowers, the tight end in the National Football League that thus far this season leads all tight ends in terms of total targets, receptions, and receiving yards. Taking on the Cincinnati Bengals, which is a top 10 matchup at the position, we're anticipating a lot of success out of Brock Bowers as he is the primary number 1 receiving option of this offense. Again, last week against the Kansas City Chiefs defense, an elite defense that shut him down, had 5 receptions. I'd imagine he'd be able to go ahead and probably accumulate 6, 7 receptions this week against this defense in the Cincinnati Bengals. Then we move on to Devontae Smith. Look, Devontae Smith, in the absence of Dallas Goedert, outside of that 1 week in which he had -2 receiving yards, has always been consistent when Dallas Goedert has been out, whether it's 2024, 2023, 2022. You look at the last 10 games he has played without Dallas Goedert. He is an incredible overall fantasy product. Therefore, 3.5 receptions against a defense like the Jacksonville Jaguars, who cannot cover opposing slot receiving options, is an automatic. And then we move on to the final option, which is Chase Brown. Earlier today, they did designate that Zach Moss was doubtful to play on Sunday. That leaves this entire backfield to Chase Brown. Over the course of the last 4 games, the Cincinnati Bengals running backs have been exposed to 6 targets, and 5 receptions per game on average. If those are, the vast majority of those are going to go in the direction of Chase Brown, I'd anticipate, as successful as he is as a receiving back, to get himself all of that workload, get himself easily 3 receptions within the upcoming contest against the Las Vegas Raiders defense. Of course, Joe Burrow having to check the ball down often or look in the direction of Mike Gesicki because of the absence of T. Higgins opens up even more opportunity for a running back like Chase Brown to get himself 3 receptions or more within the given week. That's the first entry of this given week, a $100 entry for $338. Not putting any $500 entries in, not going completely crazy in that overall circumstance, even though I am very much so confident within the overall play. And then we go ahead and transition into talking about the next play. So if you go ahead and you travel over to Underdog on your phone, whether it's iOS and or Android, if you download the app, there's a promotion on the app in which you can pretty much like swipe as if it's a dating app, going like yes or no on specific plays in terms of anytime touchdowns. And in this case, I went ahead and I just put together Kyren Williams, Alvin Kamara, and Derrick Henry, all going higher than 0.5 of their total touchdowns going into this week. And I got an extra like red zone rush boost in terms of the overall entry. So the multiplier jumped a little bit, even though these are all technically guarantees. Derrick Henry has scored a touchdown minimum every single game thus far this season. Kyren Williams follows the same suit in terms of scoring a touchdown every single game this season. And then we have Alvin Kamara taking on the Carolina Panthers, the best matchup at the running back position, which we would assume that he's going to find himself in the end zone. And let's say, for example, he doesn't, and Taysom Hill steals a rushing touchdown, or Derek Carr steals a rushing touchdown, Olave steals a rushing touchdown. He's vulture protected. All 3 of these running backs vulture protected. So if a player that is not a running back steals a touchdown from them, you're still going to be safe. Derrick Henry, if Lamar steals a touchdown on the ground, again, still protected. Therefore, going into this week, another one of my favorite plays. Again, we're going to go ahead and continue to put in more and more entries over the course of this weekend. Later tonight, when I live stream on the channel, I will put together another entry. Saturday morning, when we live stream. Sunday morning, when I live stream, I'll share more and more entries. Again, if you guys are interested, be sure to check out Underdog today. There's a link down in the description. Potentially tail these picks as we have been on fire as of late. All right, guys, I want to thank you all for watching. This is going to cover the hidden gems for week 9 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Again, I'll be back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. PST, for a 1-hour live stream. And then on Sunday morning, starting at 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I'll be live streaming with questions answered and updated rankings on screen. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.